The Voice 17104.com. This is Zanetta Wingfield, and you're listening to The Voice 17104.com. The Voice 17104.com.
Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice. Greetings, my friends, and salutations. Welcome again to the Richard James Show. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. The sun is shining, and life goes on. You know, something happened recently to give me further respect for our President of the United States, Joe Biden, and also for Kamala Harris, who is the first African-American female to be Vice President of the United States. In fact, I think she is the first female Vice President of the United States, regardless of what the color is. But anyway, Brother Biden has signed into existence a holiday called Juneteenth. Signed into a holiday called Juneteenth. Some of you folks may be asking, what in the devil is Juneteenth? I would say, what in heaven is Juneteenth? Juneteenth, which occurred in 1863, and was a proclamation that was issued by the late great President Abraham Lincoln, freeing slaves. Basically, it affected the South more so than any other part of the country. Many of the northern states did not have slavery in effect anyway. But you know, there was a law that was passed called the Fugitive Slave Law, so that slave hunters or bounty hunters could even go in the northern states and grab even free Black folks and take them south and ex-slaves and put them back into slavery. So in a sense, slavery did exist in some of the northern states to the extent that they could be apprehended, uprooted, and returned to the South, where they would be going to forced labor and retain their slave status. So that existed. And in the year 1865, 2 years later, you know, Texas had never really, even though it was a southern state, even though it was a state in the country, they had never really accepted the freedom, the emancipation of slaves. So the federal troops went into Texas and said, hey, slaves are no longer slaves. They're free human beings, and they have equal opportunity in terms of property and voting and the things that citizens allow. So in 1865, slaves were free in Galveston, I think it was. Galveston, yes it was, in Texas. Now, so most people take the year 1865 as the year of the slaves as Juneteenth, the year that slaves became free and became emancipated. But that's not the true actual date. But we'll roll with it. 1865. We'll take 1865. But the thing that I'm most pleased with is the fact that the President of the United States is doing the right thing, doing things that should have been done a long time ago. Even my president, who I love dearly, Barack Obama, didn't do it. There were things that Barack could have done and should have done, but was really didn't really want to offend his white constituents. I think that affected some of his decisions that he made. Patriot Act was one that I totally disagree with him on in supporting that. But other things were done and were done well. It do a lot of good, a lot of positive things, a lot of caring things. And some of the things that he really wanted to do, Mitch McConnell and some of the congressional Republicans indicated that they were going to make sure that Barack Obama was a failure. Wasn't a failure, but he didn't nearly complete or do the kinds of things that he really wanted to do. Juneteenth is what we're talking about today. The celebration of the end of the most hideous, the most brutal, the most horrible institution the world's ever seen. Slavery has been seen and has been carried out all over the world. But never have people been stripped of their humanity, stripped of their language, stripped of their identity in terms of who they are, stripped of their humanity. In other words, made to feel that they're less than human. That's the way it was done in the continental United States, the worst brand of slavery the world has ever seen. And this was taken throughout the world. These same folks, the British, the French, the Belgians, destroying and uprooting resources from country to country. The Congo, Australia, places all over the world, spewing their racist garbage throughout the world. That's what they did. Spewing their racist garbage throughout the world, as I said. Juneteenth was a celebration of the end of slavery. Now let me clarify a few things for some of you who don't really know the facts. Now, the cross-Atlantic passage, the date comes out 1619. That's when the first slaves supposedly landed in Jamestown in Virginia, and that began slavery. It did begin slavery, but what it didn't do, these were not the first Africans that came to the New World. Understand that. These were not the same or the first Africans that came. Africans first came here years ago as explorers. Even some of the Spanish conquistadors had blacks with them. A man by the name of Alonso Nino, who was a navigator. Others came. Estevanico, another black man, came here prior to the institution of slavery. They were not slaves, they were explorers. Understand that. Emperor for the country of Mali, Mansa Musa, known to be, and by scientists of today's measurement, said to be the richest man that ever existed. That no human being, including all of the wealthy individuals, can compare at all with Mansa Musa. And Mansa Musa had individuals in ships that sailed to the New World and made contact with natives here in this country years, hundreds of years prior to Christopher Columbus, okay, who was an explorer, and prior to the slave traders who were in the whole traffic Middle Passage thing because of the money. That Middle Passage, people guess and say how many came across. They don't know. How would they know? It's estimated that well over 1 million, maybe 2 million. Who knows? But we know millions and thousands of us came across. And by the way, the country that had the largest number of slaves, the largest number of African Americans, was Brazil. It was not the United States. Brazil, with its many plantations and many agricultural products that they shipped throughout the world, they brought in thousands and thousands of slaves to work the land. That's a fact. That happened. So get the total picture. We were not just slaves. I don't want your psychic to think that the only way that Black folks got here because they were pulled out of the jungle, forced on the slave ships and came here. That happened. Yes, it did. But that is not the only way that they came. Understand that. That is not what happened. And they left, some of them, civilizations with written language, civilizations with buildings, with libraries, with universities. They want you to think that we were poor and ignorant and illiterate, and that these explorers helped us out. Yeah, they helped us out by stealing our gold, by stealing our copper, our zinc, our uranium, exploiting and taking taking the resources that were there, taking human capital, if you call that helping us. So now here we are today, live and well, still fighting for the right to vote. We had a Voting Rights Act that expired, one that was pushed and put into place with John Lewis and others that fought hard to do that. And it expired. And this Republican dominated House and others has refused to reinstitute the Voting Rights Act. But we got to do it. We have a Supreme Court now that is led by a majority of Republicans, right-wing Republicans. We have a white man painted black who's supposed to be black, but he ain't. Clarence Thomas, who is more racist than a racist. You know, who anything that helps people, whether they're black or white, he's against. He and his racist wife. Whoops, did Richard James say that? Richard James not the only one that said that. Most people think that, but they don't know how he said it. And now we find this guy is abusing his office in terms of using funds that were supposed to be created for his office, and he's using it on his personal self. That's not a surprise to me. This man has no morality. He has no standards whatsoever. None whatsoever. So we celebrate Juneteenth. And I'm going to lift up Kamala Harris. I'm going to lift up Joe Biden because they are supporting and projecting, and they made it a national holiday. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord, my mother would say. They made it. You see the importance of this. It's important for people, and particularly our young people, to know what our history is. And the only way they're going to know is that we create positive holidays like Juneteenth, that we create in our classrooms textbooks that will provide information, historical information, on every aspect of human life in this country. And we can't cut out racism and discrimination because it's a reality. They need to know. They need to have the information. And when we get a racist governor that Santos to hit, the governor of Florida, saying that he does not want Black history taught in the schools, that is somehow racist. All these guys, I mean, it's just hard to see some of the garbage that drips from their racist mouth. But at any rate, we're going to continue to lift up the truth, whether you like it or not. Juneteenth. We got a couple of videos here that's going to tell the story of Juneteenth. Okay, now we're going to roll our first video. Take it easy. We'll take a look. Thank you.
A landmark moment in American history. President Biden, just back from the Geneva summit with Vladimir Putin, about to make Juneteenth a national holiday. This comes just 2 days before June 19th, recognized as the day the last enslaved Black people were freed in Texas in 1865 in the wake of the Civil War. The bill, of course, gaining momentum following the death of George Floyd and the racial reckoning. The conversation in this country. Let's listen to the Vice President.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. So throughout history, Juneteenth has been known by many names: Jubilee Day, Freedom Day, Liberation Day, Emancipation Day, and today, a national holiday. And looking out across this room, I see the advocates, the activists, the leaders who have been calling for this day for so long, including the one and only Miss Opal Lee. Who just received a very special recognition from the President of the United States. And I see members of Congress, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, members of the United States Senate who passed this bill unanimously. And all of whom collectively were responsible for delivering this bill to the President's desk. And I thank you all. We thank you all. Your nation thanks you all. And you know, when we establish a national holiday, it makes an important statement. National holidays are something important. These are days when we as a nation have decided to stop and take stock, and often to acknowledge our history. And so as we establish Juneteenth as our newest national holiday, let us be clear about what happened on June 19th, 1865, the day we call Juneteenth. Because you see, that day was not the end of slavery in America. Yes, on that day, the enslaved people of Galveston, Texas, learned that they were free. But in fact, 2.5 years earlier, the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery in the Confederacy. So think about that. For more than 2 years, the enslaved people of Texas were kept in servitude. For more than 2 years, they were intentionally kept from their freedom. For more than 2 years. And then on that summer day, 156 years ago, the enslaved people of Texas learned the news. They learned that they were free, and they claimed their freedom. It was indeed an important day. And still, let us also remember, that day was not the end of slavery in America. The truth is, it would be 6 more months before the 13th Amendment was ratified, before enslaved people in the South and the North were free. So as we commemorate the history of Juneteenth, as we did just weeks ago with the history of the Tulsa Race Massacre, we must learn from our history, and we must teach our children our history, because it is part of our history as a nation. It is part of American history. So let me end by saying this. We are gathered here in a house built by enslaved people. We are footsteps away from where President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And we are here to witness President Joe Biden establish Juneteenth as a national holiday. We have come far, and we have far to go, but today is a day of celebration. It is not only a day of pride, it is also a day for us to reaffirm and rededicate ourselves to action. And with that, I say, happy Juneteenth, everybody. And with that, I introduce the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Madam Vice President. 156 years ago, 156 years, June 19th, 1865. John, thanks for being here. Major General of the Union Army arrived in Galveston, Texas, to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation and free the last enslaved Americans in Texas from bondage. The day, as you all know, and we repeat some of what was said, became known as Juneteenth. You all know that. A day that reflects what the Psalm tells us. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Juneteenth marks both the long, hard night of slavery and subjugation and a promise of a brighter morning to come. This is a day of profound, in my view, profound weight and profound power. A day in which we remember the moral stain, the terrible toll that slavery took on the country and continues to take. What I've long called America's original sin. At the same time, I also remember the extraordinary capacity to heal and to hope and to emerge from the most painful moments in a bitter, bitter version of ourselves, but to make a better version of ourselves. And today we consecrate Juneteenth for what it ought to be, what it must be, a national holiday. As the Vice President noted, a holiday that will join the others of our national celebrations, our independence, our laborers who built this nation, our servicemen and women who served and died in its defense, and the first new national holiday since the creation of Martin Luther King holiday nearly 4 decades ago. I'm grateful to the members of Congress here today, in particular to the Congressional Black Caucus, who did so much to make this day possible. I'm especially pleased that we showed the nation that we can come together as Democrats and Republicans to commemorate this day with an overwhelming bipartisan support of the Congress. I hope this is the beginning of a change in the way we deal with one another. And we're blessed to mark the day in the presence of Miss Opal Lee. As my mother said, God love her. I had the honor of meeting her in Nevada more than a year ago. She told me she loved me, and I believed it. I wanted to believe it. Ms. Opal, you're incredible. A daughter of Texas, grandmother of the movement to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. And Ms. Opal is, you won't believe it, she's 49 years old. Or 94 years old, but you are an incredible woman, Ms. Opal, you really are. As a child growing up in Texas, she and her family would celebrate Juneteenth. And Juneteenth, 1939, when she was 12 years old, a white mob torched her family home. But such hate never stopped her, any more than it stopped the vast majority of you I'm looking at from this podium. Over the course of decades, she's made it her mission to see that this day came. It was almost a singular mission. She's walked for miles and miles, literally and figuratively, to bring attention to Juneteenth, to make this day possible. I ask, once again, we all stand and give her a warm welcome to the White House. As they still say in the Senate, and I said for 36 years, if you excuse me for a point of personal privilege, as I was walking down, I regret that my grandchildren aren't here, because this is a really, really, really important moment in our history. By making Juneteenth a federal holiday, all Americans can feel the power of this day and learn from our history and celebrate progress and grapple with the distance we've come, but the distance we have to travel, Jim. And I said a few weeks ago, marking the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, great nations don't ignore their most painful moments. Great nations don't ignore their most painful moments. They don't ignore those moments in the past. They embrace them.
Yes.
Great nations don't walk away. We come to terms with the mistakes we made. And in remembering those moments, we begin to heal and grow stronger. The truth is, it's simply not enough just to commemorate Juneteenth. After all, the emancipation of enslaved Black Americans didn't mark the end of America's work to deliver on the promise of equality. It only marked the beginning. To honor the true meaning of Juneteenth, we have to continue toward that promise, because we've not gotten there yet. The Vice President and I and our entire administration and all of you in this room are committed to doing just that. That's why we've launched an aggressive effort to combat racial discrimination in housing. Finally address the cruel fact that a home owned to this day by a Black American family is usually appraised at a low rate for a similar home owned by a white family in a similar area. That's why we committed to increasing Black home ownership, one of the biggest drivers of generational wealth. That's why we're making it possible for more Black entrepreneurs to access capital, because their ideas is good, they lack the capital to get their fair share of federal contracts so they can begin to build wealth. That's why we're working to give each and every child 3 and 4 years of age, not daycare, but school, in a school. That's why we're unlocking the incredibly creative and innovation of the history of our historical Black colleges and universities, providing them with the resources to invest in research centers and laboratories to help HBCU graduates prepare and compete for good-paying jobs in the industries of the future. Folks, the promise of equality is not going to be fulfilled until we becomes real in our schools and on our main streets and in our neighborhoods. Our healthcare system and ensuring that equity is at the heart of our fight against the pandemic. In the water that comes out of our faucets, and the air that we breathe in our communities, in our justice system, so that we can fulfill the promise of America for all people, all of our people. And it's not going to be fulfilled so long as the sacred right to vote remains under attack.
Amen.
We see this assault from restrictive laws, threats of intimidation, voter purges, and more. An assault that offends the very democracy, our very democracy. We can't rest till the promise of equality is fulfilled for every one of us in every corner of this nation. That, to me, is the meaning of Juneteenth. That's what it's about. So let's make this very Juneteenth, tomorrow, the first that our nation will celebrate all together as one nation. A Juneteenth of action on many fronts. One of those is vaccinations. Tomorrow, the Vice President will be in Atlanta on a bus tour helping to spread the word, like all of you have been doing, on life-saving vaccines. And across the country this weekend, including here in Washington, people will be canvassing and hosting events in their communities, going door to door, encouraging vaccinations. We've built equity into the heart of the vaccination program from day one, but we still have more work to do to close the racial gap in vaccination rates. The more we can do that, the more we can save lives. Today also marks the 6th anniversary of the tragic deaths at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. A killer, motivated by hate, intending to start a race war in South Carolina. He joined his victims in a Bible study class. Then he took their lives in a house of worship. It's a reminder that our work to root out hate never ends, because hate only hides. It never fully goes away, it hides. And when you breathe oxygen under that rock, it comes out. And that's what we must understand, that Juneteenth represents not only the commemoration of the end of slavery in America more than 150 years ago, but the ongoing work to have to bring true equity and racial justice into American society, which we can do. In short, this day doesn't just celebrate the past. It calls for action today. I wish all Americans a happy Juneteenth. And I'm certainly in a moment, going to sign into law, making it a federal holiday. And I have to say to you, I've only been president for several months, but I think this will go down for me as one of the greatest honors I will have had as president. Not because I did it, you did it, Democrats and Republicans. But it's an enormous, enormous honor. Thank you for what you've done. And by the way, typical of most of us in Congress and Senate, I went down the other end of the hall first and thanked your staffs, because I know who does the hard work. No, they're down there. They're at the other end. But I thank them as well. May God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. Now, I'd like to invite up, while I sign, Senator Tina Smith, Senator Ed Markey, Senator Raphael Warnock, Senator John Cornyn, Whip John Clyburn, Representative Barbara Lee, Representative Danny Davis, Chair Joyce Beatty, and Sheila Jackson Lee, and Miss Opal.
President Biden inviting several members of Congress, both the House and the Senate, up to the podium, up to the table where he will sign into federal law Juneteenth, making it a federal holiday. He mentioned Ms. Opal Lee.
All right.
The final name he invited up to that table, 94 years old. She's been fighting for many, many years for this to become a federal holiday. She's a retired Fort Worth educator. And at 94, she told local reporters, "I'm so delighted to know that suddenly we've got a Juneteenth. It's not a Texas thing, not a black thing. It's an American thing," she said. Handing her the pen there. Also not lost on us, the significance of the vice president holding Opal Lee's hand. Vice President Kamala Harris beginning the comments in the east room of the White House there. The first woman vice president, but the first vice president of color, marking this historic day in our country. And as the president signs the bill, we took note of who he said he regretted not having in that room with him, his grandchildren. He said, because this is a day when all Americans can learn part of our history, the distance that we have come, and he said the distance we must still travel.
Hi, everyone. George Stoltz here. Thanks for checking.
All right. Joe Biden, you have my support. He's doing things that others fear to do. He doesn't mind stepping out there and taking the risk. The things that he was saying about housing, just went through it myself. Had an appraisal on my house, and I would say half of what it was worth was clipped off. For one simple reason, we're Black. That happens all the time. That happens right now. Sometimes women and our folks don't get appropriate medical support that they need. It's right. Education. Juneteenth celebrates the emancipation from slavery. But when we talk about reparations, then it starts right here. Not only for past injustices, but we're looking at how we are being treated now. If you want to me, repair, reparations means repairing a wrong to make it right. And it's one thing to talk about giving folks a check. Check is one thing. It's important. Land is one thing. My grandfather had 150 acres of land that was taken away from him. That land needs to be returned. Not that specific land, something equivalent somewhere needs to be returned. That happens all the time in the South. Black farmers are at constant risk and in jeopardy. This happens all the time. We're lifting up Juneteenth. We're celebrating the emancipation of slaves, of slavery. And contrary to some other folks saying that Lincoln wasn't really that interested in freeing the slaves, all he wanted to do was to save the Union, that's a bunch of crap. Lincoln from the very beginning was against slavery. And whether he had to negotiate with some of those Southern pecks to get it done, he made it did, but he was against slavery. Lincoln was also a member of the colonial society, which means that those Africans who wanted to go home, as proposed by people like Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey and other folks, people that want to go home can go. And Lincoln was responsible for establishing a nation, a colony that later became independent called Liberia. And over 13,000 Africans returned home. They don't tell you that. Lincoln was one of the greatest presidents that ever lived. The man stood by his principles. And they should have had more security to prevent John Wilkes Booth, who was a racist, coward dog that slaughtered Abraham Lincoln. And I don't care what kind of tag, whether it was Republican or Democrat, At that point, it was the Republicans that was lifting up and fighting for equality and ending racism. We celebrate Juneteenth, the end of slavery. But we can have a greater celebration if we are able to end systemic discrimination against people. We have another video where we're going to give you the historical history of Juneteenth. Let it roll. We're going to show this video and you'll learn something.
That, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between an employer and hired labor.
You can imagine the burden lifted from these people, the men, the women, the children that knew that they were chattel, property, and now understanding that they were free. But the question that was lingering was, what did freedom look like?
The slaves built this country.
They had a sense of who they were. They very quickly built a sense of community.
To what degree have we actually achieved the absolute freedom that Juneteenth promised?
Ignoring these painful histories doesn't mean that they don't still influence us.
We stand on the shoulders of those that came before us, and we need to honor their memory by telling their story.
Juneteenth, 1865 to 2021.
Galveston, Texas, a place known for tourism and quick getaways. But it's the history which happened here that impacts us all today.
African slaves were brought here on ships in the 1800s. But even after the slave trade ended, slavery here did not.
It was 1865, June 19th, now known as Juneteenth, when Union soldiers arrived and told slaves they were free.
It came 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln announced slavery had ended in the United States.
And we should remember this important date, June 19, 1865, represents the evolution of our country to a more perfect union. We were not perfect in 1528, 1619, 1776, 1865, or even the day in 2021, but we're moving, hopefully, to a more perfect union.
Juneteenth is directly related to the history of the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved people in the Confederacy. Juneteenth is important for Texas because that is when enslaved Texans learned they were free and that the Confederacy had fallen.
So we're standing in the 2200 block of the Strand Historic District in Galveston. This was the heart of the commercial district, and at one time
Was the largest city in Texas.
the largest enslaver also lived here in Galveston. They owned 7 plantations, 4 in Brazoria County, 2 in Matagorda County, and 1 in Fort Bend.
Texas was this safe haven for slavery. They did what they call the running of the slaves. That was basically moving their slaves to Texas, because there was no Union presence in Texas.
When Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he knew that that would not immediately end slavery, and it didn't. And the reason is fairly simple. The Confederate States of America had formed its own country. They elected their own president. Confederate states printed their own money, which is why the Confederacy and the United States went to war. The United States' goal at the beginning of the war was just to restore the Union. The first war goal was not to emancipate the enslaved population.
And there were all these myths and stories about what happened and why it took 2.5 years for the word to reach Texas. Plantation owners in Texas were well aware of the Emancipation Proclamation, but they ignored it. What they cared about was maintaining the agrarian economy in Texas, and that was solidly based on cotton. And to maintain that, they needed slave labor. General Gordon Granger was on his way to Texas. Most of the Texas authorities had a pretty good idea what he was coming to Texas to do. Granger was in Texas for about a month. He sent his troops.
There were white soldiers and black soldiers.
Plantation to plantation, making the announcement.
Those black soldiers are people who especially helped shift the Union war goals from a war to restore the Union into a war of emancipation. It was personal for them.
They went over to the old Custom House on 20th Street to the Courthouse Square, from the Courthouse Square to the Colored Church on Broadway, which was Reedy Chuck.
Some of the dock workers were among the first to get the word, and so the celebrations began.
Give us a sense of what it must have been like for slaves on Juneteenth when they heard that message.
You know, that was something that was almost like going to heaven.
The celebrations, just to be so excited to taste that freedom.
The initial celebrations, there would be prayer services, looking back at our journey in this country and what we had to endure in bondage. And the people who never lived to see that day. I think it's inescapable not to remember those people. Transatlantic voyage, the Middle Passage, people jumping off ships to avoid the treatment that they would have to endure.
You know, and old Marshall didn't tell you, it was free.
He didn't tell you that?
No, he didn't tell you. I think now they said they wait them 6 months out of that, 6 months, and turn them loose on the 19th of June. That's why you celebrate that day, colored folks. Celebrate that day.
One of the quotes that I'm most fond of is from a former slave named Felix Haywood. Slavery could make you free, but it couldn't make you rich, because a lot of slaves thought that now that they were free, they would be rich, just like the white man.
You think about the elation, the trepidation of enslaved people not knowing what their future holds and being enslaved and bondage being lifted from their backs.
And there was one narrative about one slave who got the word, and his sister said, brother gave a whoop and ran away, and I never saw him again.
Was the South ready to free slaves? No, we know that.
Even though the order indicated the enslaved were free, if you look at the last sentence, it gives some instructions of what they can or cannot do.
The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere.
When you're told you're free, you're thinking that, oh, I can live my life. But it wasn't like that.
On one hand, you were free by name, but the actual reality of freedom, you were not fully experiencing it.
There were a lot of very frightened former slaves, and a lot of them stayed on the plantation.
They laid the bricks in the downtown area here where we stand on many of these buildings. Not only laid the bricks, but made the bricks.
Just off Galveston's bustling Broadway Street is Ashton Villa, built in 1859 by James Monroe Brown, a loyalist to the Confederacy, dubbed an honorary colonel. Brown was also a wealthy banker, architect, and mason who designed what's believed to be Texas' first all-brick house, a palace with bricks all laid by slaves.
Anywhere you read, they will tell you that, slaves did all the work for this. They had to follow what the contractor was either telling them or showing them in order to do it. And look at this place. It's beautiful.
All of the intricacies and the detail
that still stand today. It's amazing.
1859, one of the few buildings that withstood the 1900 storm.
Ashton Villa was saved from demolition in 1970. The historic home, now an event space, is operated by the Galveston Historical Foundation and home to the island's annual Juneteenth celebration.
They could leave the farm, they could leave the plantation, and they did, because so many emancipated people no longer wanted to work in agriculture because it reminded them of enslavement. For many people, the draw was labor, the opportunity to earn wages.
Working to pay off debt. The debts were never paid off. There were a lot of things that still kept the free people
suppressed.
And that's why a group of them ended up in your hometown, in Houston. So they marched to Houston.
The black population of Houston boomed. They began to build homes in the part of Houston known as 4th Ward. Houston was divided into 6 different wards at the time. And so the land in that area of 4th Ward happened to be very low and flood prone. It wasn't land that was coveted by white Houstonians at the time.
When you look at the bricks of Freedmanstown, that brick is a symbol of foundation. That brick was a symbol of hope. The brick was theirs. They made the brick, they formed the brick, shaped the brick, they laid the brick. They stood on the brick.
Iconic housing of Freedmanstown was the shotgun house. There was a door in the front and then a door in the back. And people would joke that if you shot a gun, the bullet would travel all the way through without hitting anything.
The legendary Jack Yates, this is the land where he lived, and right next door to him was his son, the printer Rutherford B.H. Yates. The first time I walked along these bricks, I was very emotional. This is where my people decided that they would survive. These are 8-pound bricks that were double baked. And the significance of these bricks is that it has that beautiful red color of the clay that was here. And the fact that they are still here today is a testament to their strength, a testament to their craftsmanship and their skill.
No, these are original. I reside here in Freedmanstown. I was born in Freedmanstown, probably conceived in Freedmanstown. And this is a home that has been passed down through our family. I'm like the 5th generation. And the family operated a ice business and just drove through the community selling blocks of ice.
They did their best to gain property and to support their communities.
The wards in Houston functioned a little bit like small towns. 3rd Ward develops a black community. 5th Ward develops one early. The black community of 3rd Ward begins to develop around what we today call Emancipation Avenue, but that back then was Dowling Street, which was actually the name of a Confederate. Dowling is really the center of old black 3rd Ward. And one of the reasons for that is the creation or the purchase of Emancipation Park. And it's the first public space owned by black people in the state of Texas.
With newfound freedom came new challenges, including the fight to be seen as equal.
Freed men and women did more than survive. They built a legacy.
And it is right here, Emancipation Park,
in Houston's historic 3rd Ward.
Emancipation Park was always a place to celebrate.
2 black church congregations fundraised to buy the park. For them, the memory of Juneteenth would have been very fresh. They were someone else's property less than a decade earlier.
I'm the great-great-granddaughter of Jack Yates. He was instrumental in purchasing
Emancipation Park, where the free slaves celebrated Juneteenth.
One of the most famous families in Reconstruction era Houston were the Yates family.
He was free. However, his wife and children weren't. So he came to Texas and entered back into slavery so that he could be with his family.
They were brought here to continue to be slaves.
Once freedom came again, he knew what that tasted like. He knew what that felt like. So he took his family and moved to Houston to start a brand new life.
Jack Yates actually began helping and teaching and helping them to learn, because at that time, slaves weren't supposed to read or write.
He was a wage laborer as his day job, and at night preach near the Buffalo Bayou in Houston. And then gradually they were able to build their own church.
I'm a member of Antioch Missionary Baptist Church and have been all of my life. That was the first church that he started, but there were many other churches that he started, including Bethel in Houston.
It is that spirit, it is that zeal, it is that determination that he and others poured into the foundations when they built this church. So when you talk about World War I, our soldiers went off to fight. When they came home, Antioch was able to train and cross-train ex-veterans in masonry work, in carpentry work, and really help these ex-soldiers to find jobs and to provide homes for their families, education for their children. It was these very women from this very church who taught other women how to vote.
So many great people have been here and have been inspiring and galvanizing the community.
When I was growing up in Houston, I knew the name Yates because it was the name of a high school, Jack Yates High School in 3rd Ward, the first black school in Houston. For a while had just been called Houston Colored High School. As the black community spreads and grows in other parts of the city, you need more schools. So when a second high school is established in Houston in 3rd Ward, it's named after Jack Yates.
Oh.
Ready to come in, Reg?
No. No.
A massive mural in Galveston's tourist-heavy Strand district depicts the long journey to absolute equality.
Expand the narrative of Juneteenth to tell a more full story of our shared American history. The things that have been invisible are becoming visible, and the stories that have been hidden are being discovered.
Galveston Historical Foundation member and Hitchcock-born businessman Sam Collins made it his business to have Galveston's history on display. I met with him at the mural, an art installation that Sam wanted to use to paint a better picture of Juneteenth, giving it depth and dating it back to centuries before the emancipation of slaves. Artist and activist Reginald Adams brought the vision to life with detailed vignettes featuring historic figures.
And then he moves through the Middle Passage, the enslaved Africans being sold by other Africans. Harriet Tubman is an iconic female image on the mural. Then you have Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation.
The soldiers have a very prominent place within this mural. There are more soldiers than anyone else here on the mural, it seems like.
The United States Colored Troops represent 75% of the Union forces that came into Texas. Nowhere in the history books when I was in elementary, junior high, high school, or even college, did anybody teach me that colored troops helped bring the message of freedom here.
Just beyond the mural and at the end of the same lot, side of the old Osterman building and where General Granger signed the orders and dispersed the troops to post them, is the Juneteenth historical marker from the Texas Historical Commission.
And I thought, how can that be? one of the most historic events in American history, didn't have a subject marker.
Sam Collins spent 2 years fundraising and organizing efforts to secure one.
One of the things that I've worked to do is not to take away from what has already been told, but to add to it. This corner has now been transformed into an outdoor classroom. We're going to use technology to teach this history.
We're going to end the video at this point. I'm hoping you enjoyed it. And we got it off of YouTube, so hey, look it up. It's a wonderful video. Juneteenth is a new holiday. President Biden signed the proclamation and create the holiday, and people are no longer ignoring Juneteenth. And in fact, some people are just learning about it, learning that it exists. I learned many, many years ago in the South. They were celebrated in my hometown in Thomasville, Georgia. Juneteenth, the end of slavery, formal slavery. But we still have problems with human trafficking, where young women are taken and sold into slavery right here today. And in our major cities, Philadelphia, New York, we have young women that are being snatched up, homeless young women and young men, and sold into slavery. Slavery has not ended in spite of the end of Juneteenth, the end of slavery. There's forms of slavery that exist in society today. Hear me. Be careful. Keep a close look at your children. Make sure that they are secure, because we're having a real problem with human trafficking today. Slavery has not ended in regards to even after the whole thing with the celebration of Juneteenth. I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. We're going to still continue to lift up the truth. Some people don't like to hear the truth. They don't feel like it is. But there's a criminal element in our society that we've got to deal with. And the only way we can deal with it is really to remain united, remain together. And to me, I think everything comes from a position of love, understanding, and a willingness to lift up the bloodstained banner, the willingness to lift up the truth, tell it the way it is, and to try to bring folks together, bring about change. Thank God for Juneteenth. Thank God for the holiday. And we'll thank God when slavery truly, truly ends. And human trafficking is a point, and keep it in mind, look for it, read about it, understand it, and protect and secure your children. I'm gonna say it again. Make sure your kids are secure. And they don't be so quick to shove a child out of the house if they do some wrong. Get the help that you need. If you need professional help, get some professional help. Don't push a child out in the street. We have autism that exists today, and a lot of kids with a lot of emotional illness. And that's what it is, it's an emotional, behavioral kind of thing. But many of the autistic kids are not getting the professional help and guidance that they need. So celebrate Juneteenth, but love, protect, secure your young people. And I'm going to say so long. We always tell you that we're still down in 35, South 8th Street. So come and see us sometime if you get a chance. They're doing some marvelous things down there in terms of bringing in new vendors and that kind of thing. So if we can be of any service to you in any way, please do it. There's an event that's taking place this Saturday, the 17th, honoring Juneteenth on 8th Street in the community park, in which I'm going to be speaking and playing some drums. So come down to see me. Okay, honoring Juneteenth. It's going to start on Saturday the 17th from 1 to 5. So we'll look forward to seeing you at that time. We want to see your face in that place. Thank God for you, and may heaven smile upon you. And thank you, Thomas, for keeping 17104 on the air and the truth being lifted up. Take care, and so long till next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. And thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let us hear from you sometime also.
Right.
So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.